Hi. So one of my jobs, first thing in the morning, was to let the big cats out of their night quarters and into their day spaces. And when it came to the pumas, um, unknown to anybody, so I was always on my own and breaking all the rules, I would open the door. The big male puma would walk over to where I was, or he'd be waiting there, and we'd just hang out together for maybe a minute or two. I'd scratch him behind the ears and all those things that you do to make a cat purr. Pumas don't purr, but it's still like the same kind of just hanging out together briefly. He's not particularly lovey-dovey, it's just for a moment. Um, and it's kind of like a greeting, and then off I'd go, leave him to his day. This particular occasion, he suddenly tensed and looked straight past me. And I thought, he's seen a movement. I can tell by looking at his face. But there can't be a movement behind me because I always close the door. And I looked and I hadn't closed the door. It had swung open. And he'd seen a movement. Now, if he had chosen to go past me, I could not have stopped him. He would have had to be shot ultimately. And before that, he might have hurt some people very, very badly. So I changed my morning practice from that point on. I'd learned a lesson. The problem? Not paying attention. Not paying attention because I got too familiar with what are actually quite lively situations. I'd settled to a pattern and failed to reckon with the wildness of what I was handling. Well, when we engage with God, we handle the wildest being that ever exists. And we don't handle God at all, actually. We're encountering the wildest of all beings. And it behoves us to pay attention and not settle into routines which are actually going to lead us in the wrong and unhelpful direction, leading to problems. So I just wanted to mention this as an example, because when I was praying about what to share at the beginning of a year, I'm always sharing about looking down the year and planning intentionally how we're going to make an improved job of being Christians, an improved job of being church in the year ahead. And I felt convicted that, paying attention is the thing. Folks, pay attention to this business of following Jesus. It's not routine. Past patterns won't necessarily be your help in the future. And the last 2 years, marked out by COVID measures, may have led us into some patterns which are now quite hard to emerge from, as well as leading us into some things which are great and we definitely need to keep. But either way, it's going to be a matter of paying attention. So I was thinking and praying about where I would find a text that would help me draw our attention to how to live as followers of Jesus in through another year, 2022. And I lighted upon this verse. It's a favourite from Ephesians chapter 5. Well, there's two verses actually, one saying, verses 15 and 16, "Be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time, because the days are evil." Now, maybe that sounds a little over dramatic. The days are evil. But then, and I was thinking that, and then I thought, well, right now we continue to ignore how serious the days we are living in actually are. The business of global climate crisis and associated issues is still waiting in the queue below other things which are being given priority. And I'm thinking, that's evil. Whether it's accidental or just plain a decision not to face reality, I don't know. But it's evil. The result will be incredibly evil, more evil than any other selection of choices ever made in history. So maybe it's not over dramatic. But it's not to say there isn't plenty of good in the world. Oh, there's heaps of inspiring and wonderful stuff going on. Of course there is. But we do live at a particular time. And so I want to hear Paul's words resound in our own hearts and mind. Make the most of the time. Make the most of now. Make the most of 2022. Both as who you are and for us as the two churches. And if you are joining us from another context. I know some people do that through these messages. That's great. Thank you for being part of us. Forgive me for the fact that what I'm sharing in the next few minutes has very particular reference to Cannington and Westfield churches in Somerset, UK. But actually, I think, much as Paul's letter to the Ephesians applies anywhere, anytime, I think this interpretation from that you'll be able to apply anywhere, anytime. So I'm going to read to you, first of all, the first couple of verses of Ephesians 5. Now we are jumping into the middle of a section that Paul is talking about. It's not going to matter too much. It's a pity we don't have more time, but in the interests of time, we'll just jump into the middle and it'll work fine. We'll start here at chapter 5, verse 1. Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children, and live in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. What's he saying? Well, get this bit right, because so much follows from it. He's saying, your beloved children, so imitate your dad. So here's the thing. You are still imitating your parents or the significant adults involved in your upbringing, even if you've resisted it. Even if do you ever find yourself thinking, I'm sounding more and more like my mother, or whatever it is, and you go, but I don't want to, yet somehow I am. The power of that early childhood imitation is phenomenally substantial. And at its best, when good parents bring up children, that imitation plays a wonderful part in shaping a positive life. And it's very, very powerful. It can have lots of amusing outcomes. You answer the door and the pizza delivery guy's there with a stack of 12 pizzas. Well, there's only 4 people in the household, and you realise that the toddler had ordered them half an hour ago, just imitating something he'd seen, or whatever it is. All those loads of stories, aren't there, about, children imitating the adult world and some of the results. But it is very, very powerful. What Paul is saying here is just, well, here's a commonplace. Children imitate their parents. And that, when things are working well, is a good thing. In general, it's a good thing. And so you are God's beloved children, therefore imitate your parent. Imitate God. And you think, well, I can't imitate God. And Paul has anticipated that thought, and he says, who's made it possible for you to imitate him through giving you the human being, Jesus, God's Son, the Word made flesh, the thing we've been celebrating at Christmas, this coming of God into the world in a human life, who says, look, here is how you live the God life. So follow Jesus and you end up imitating God. And the consequence of that, says Paul, is love. Be imitators of God as beloved children, because you matter to God. Do you imitate God? Live in love as Christ loved us. And Christ loved us so much that he was willing to die for us. So that's how you imitate God. You just look at Jesus, start following Jesus, follow Jesus thoroughly. You'll end up imitating God, and the fruit of all that will be love. So then he goes on to another sort of thing that goes quite naturally with that image of a child imitating the parent, which is very familiar to parents, of trying to persuade children not to imitate that which is actually destructive, but which they see in others, perhaps outside the family or something. They sometimes worry about, that's not a very helpful friendship, or that kind of website isn't a very good influence, it's not leading anywhere constructive. So Paul then identifies. Now, because this can sound very like a sort of ancient form of European Puritanism, because we've often heard its language, we can miss what's going on next. Paul is now particularly concerned with worship and the gathering together of the Christian community. This will come out in a number of ways. But in their context in Ephesus, in a pagan context of their time and culture, Sex was used in worship in various forms that were very destructive of relationship and unhelpful. Um, Often the religion was concerned with personal advantage, greed, if you like, um, and things could become sort of quite not focused on what is best, but on fact what leads into difficulty. So Paul's not against a good time. He you know, you'd need to read it in balance with other things that he wrote, but I'm just going to read what he said to them in this context of saying, well, pagan worship goes into these things. You shouldn't imitate that. You should imitate Jesus. And he says this: fornication and impurity of any kind, or greed, must not even be mentioned among you, as is proper among saints. Entirely out of place is obscene, silly, and vulgar talk, but instead let there be thanksgiving. Be sure of this, that no fornicator or impure person, or one who is greedy, that is, an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes on those who are disobedient. Well, we'll be looking, folk, at the business of what is the wrath of God at a later part of this year, February, I think. Therefore, do not be associated with them. For once you were darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. Live as children of light. For the fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. Try to find out what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to mention what such people do secretly. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, for everything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, and this little bit is probably taken from a service of baptism, but we don't know for sure. Sleep or awake, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Now to our two verses. Be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time, because the days are evil. So I don't know about you, maybe that does sound a bit over the top. The days are evil, and might sound like it's, you know, one of those kind of crazies. But actually, I think it's not over the top, and I think the days we are living in, actually, there's plenty that's very, very profoundly adrift. So our part as the followers of Jesus is to shine with the light that Christ brought into the world. And therefore we will need to pay attention. This won't just look after itself. You'll have to be intentional about following Jesus in 2022. Make the most of the time. In other words, make the very best that you can be happen. Make your church the very best church that you can make it in 2022. Remember that it's each of our jobs. It's not my job or the elders' jobs. It's everybody's job to make our churches the very best churches that they can be in 2022, in a world with crisis and real need, plenty of evil at work, but where the light of Christ is also shining, and that's what we belong to. Now, looking down the year, 2022 is going to bring about something really exciting and new in the life of the two churches, Cannington and Westfield. We're going to be we're going to be joined in 3 weeks' time. She starts work. Marie, our church-related community worker, who's coming to partner us in a project we call Strengthening Community. And the Strengthening Communities thing identifies that some people are getting very isolated, other people are being left on the edges as they come and join our communities, because both communities are growing. So some people don't get to sort of play their part fully yet. There's some forces that keep them on the edge. Excuse me. And that others are simply left in deprivation despite changes, which many of which are positive. So Marie is coming and saying, what a fantastic thing. It's going to really ramp up and take us to a whole new level of our engagement with our communities. Meanwhile, we'll continue other stuff we've already started to strengthen our local communities where we're set, but also we will not neglect in 2022 as two churches our partnerships beyond our immediate communities. So we care about God's whole world. We can't address absolutely every issue, so we'll respond to issues, all kinds of issues that will come our way, and some of which are ongoing in different ways. But we have a particular focus on partnerships in Uganda, which are with 4 schools, with a dental mission, to bringing access to dentistry to those who can't afford it. The project, Fortress Project, with Nurse Josephine for teenage mums, and Arosha, Uganda, and the environmental and ecological work and education that it undertakes. So there's one group of partnerships that are very, very important to us. They will continue, and we're giving a particular emphasis at the moment also to another area of commitment for life, which is being in support of what is good and just in the tense situation between the state of Israel and Palestinian people, and wanting to feed into that circumstance that is full of fear, love, distrust, prejudice, all kinds of things, to support work which brings peace and justice and understanding and the breakdown of fears and so forth. So we've got our local community stuff, Marie coming on stream to do her work. We're going to so love working with her. It's very exciting. It's a whole new chapter in the life of these two churches. And we've got our wider world stuff still going on. We're only 2 small churches. How are we going to do it all? And the answer is this: we're committed, right? Because we're going to pay attention. And each of us is going to remember in 2022, and I'm going to be on the case to sort of remind us of this, we're going to pay attention to what it takes to follow Jesus and to be part of dynamic, exciting, Jesus-related, truly biblical churches. And that's what we're part of. And Paul, in the next section that he talks about, but I'm not going to go into it at length, but you can read for yourself as he completes this section, talks about worship. We need to pay attention to worship in 2022. The last 2 years, our patterns of worship have been disrupted. We need to retrieve some good things that we haven't been able to enjoy so much, but also we have been taught so much, we've gained so much, we've learned so much, and we are not the 2 churches that we were 2 years ago in worship and some other things. We've learned more about being church, much less building related, much more communicating and together in Christ. The heart of this matter is worship. You don't shine with the light of Christ. You don't imitate God if we fail to worship, if we ignore worship, if we don't pay attention to worship. And paying attention to worship means paying attention in body. That means showing up. Thank you for showing up to this. So whether you're at home or whether you're on premises for an occasion, being there is everything. Being there, whether you feel like it or not, is everything. You're creating and helping the Holy Spirit of God create a community of Jesus following. So you just show up and make that a priority, to show up. But more than that, don't just be there in body, be there in spirit. Be there for God, to meet with the parent we're going to imitate, to engage. I mean, how will children imitate their parent if they don't spend time in the family gathering? They'll be able to do some things, but this is such an important part of it. So you'll give yourself to it and you'll receive from creating the culture. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, and this part of it, isn't addressed for people to read as individual isolated Christians, but as part of a community that they take very seriously and they're part of. Worship Let the worship dwindle, everything else falls away. Let the worship run dry, everything else goes limp and just perishes. The worship is so key. That's where human love and divine love engage in an expression and a personal coming together. So pay attention, folks, to the worship and to the wonderful opportunities of the year ahead as we touch local community in new ways and as we continue to touch a world in such great need. God bless you, keep you safe, bless you. Never forget as you go through 2022, underneath are the everlasting arms. Amen.